Okay, perfect. It looks like we're on Facebook Live as well. So welcome everybody. My name is Alexandra Lazar. Thank you for joining our webinar with Dr. Samir Johna, The History of the Forgotten History. I want to give a special welcome to the students of Roger Williams University who are joining us today from Dr. Sargon Donabed's history class, The Heirs of Ashur, Assyrian History and Culture from the 19th to the 21st Century. That is co-sponsored with ASA. Again, I'm Alexandra, your host and your moderator of the event. I'm the executive director at Assyrian Studies Association, a nonprofit with the mission to promote the academic study of the Assyrian heritage through supporting research, teaching, and intellectual collaboration amongst scholars in various fields from around the globe. Before I pass this over to Dr. Johna to conduct his presentation, I want to touch on some house rules. As an attendee, your microphone and video will be muted and turned off throughout the presentation. All questions will be entertained after the presentation. Please refer to the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen to type in your questions that you may have. If you are viewing this from Facebook Live, welcome, and please note that we will try our best to answer your questions as well. And now I'd like to take the time to introduce our esteemed speaker for today. Dr. Samir Johna was born and raised in Iraq. He is currently a clinical professor of surgery at Loma Linda University's Medical Center and at Kaiser Permanente's Bernard J. Tyson School of Medicine. He also served in Iraq military for 6 years during the First and Second Gulf Wars. Dr. Johna received his medical degree from the College of Medicine at the University of Baghdad and completed his general surgery residency program in California. In addition, he has published over 70 peer-reviewed articles, chapters, and books in the history of medicine and much more. On behalf of everyone on the board of directors and on our board of advisors from Assyrian Studies Association, we welcome you to this webinar, Dr. Johna. And let me unmute you as I do that.
And good morning and good evening to all of you, wherever you are. I would like to thank Dr. Sargon Donabed of Roger Williams University and Alexandra Lazar of the Assyrian Studies Association for the privilege of this virtual podium. Without them, this would have not seen the light, so I'm very thankful to them. I'd also like to thank all of you taking the time to join us. Before I start, I would like to state for the record that I'm not a historian by any measure. Rather, I am just an avid reader and an investigator who will be talking about a topic that is near and dear to my heart on two accounts. First, I am an Assyrian, and second, I am a surgeon and I relate to the topic at hand. In planning for the presentation, I realized that I do not need to elaborate on what is already known about the Assyrians. Rather, I prefer to try and fill some gaps in Assyrian history that is not well published and even less known by the public and sometimes scholars alike, whether by omission or commission, hence the topic. To start, it is reasonable to assume that no one described the rise and the fall of the Assyrian Empire better than the old scripture. Assyria has been mentioned over 110 times in the Bible. It can be simply summarized by 3 verses from the Bible. So let's go to the next slide, please.
Oh, one moment.
All right. So here are the verses from the Bible. If you look in Isaiah 5:28, O Assyrians, the rod of my anger and the staff in their hand is my indignation. God goes on to say that arrows are sharp and their bows are bent, and their horses' hooves shall be counted like flint and their wheels like a whirlwind. This is in Isaiah 5:28. You know, this is a vivid description of a mighty empire that God himself had used to discipline his chosen people when they are out of line. Yet at one point in history, there was a change in heart. I wish I knew why. Be it as it may, you read under the Zechariah 10:11 that says, or Zechariah 10:11 that says, and the pride of Assyria shall cease. Next slide, please.
Okay. Okay, we're ready.
Okay. Unknown to many, Assyria was not only a military state. Assyrians were on the cutting edge of science. Many of their discoveries and inventions are still used today. Let's take an example, the wheel. Assyrians were the first to discover or actually invent the wheel, which was initially used in pottery and then into military complex industries such as the carriages and the tanks and what have you. They excelled in mathematics. They were the ones behind the system of 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 24 hours in a day, and 360 degrees in a circle. In astronomy, in medicine, in technology, whether it was used for military or for construction, and even for arts. You can see all these, artifacts from Assyria and the intricacy with which they were carved on actually solid stones. Each of the Lamassu, the winged bulls, can be up to 40 tons in weight. That is not a small feat. Irrigation. Until today, there is the dam of Sinharit, which is actually on the river of Khasr in Nineveh, as well as governance. The Assyrians at that time had one of the most advanced states, if you will, where they instituted a system of governance like no other before. Let's go to the next slide, please.
Okay, you ready?
Yes. But the Assyrian star dwindled down, and it was several centuries before we could hear again about the Assyrians. And the reason for that is the rise of Christianity as it became their sparkling star and brought them to the forefront again. We accepted Christianity as Assyrians in 32 AD. And if you read about the history of the church, you will come across a legend, which is called the legend of Abgar-Ukama, which was the king of Israel. After the Assyrians lost their empire in 612 BC, they dispersed into the mountain of what is known today as Turkey, and they had principalities. One of them was called Israel, with the capital of Edessa. It was ruled by a king called Abgar-Ukama. Ukama means black. We use Koma today. And the legend goes that Jesus had an exchange of letters with King Abgar-Ukama, whose capital was Edessa, like we said. According to the legend, the king, which is afflicted with leprosy, had heard of Jesus' miracles and wrote to Jesus acknowledging his divine mission, asking to be cured and inviting him to come to Edessa as a safe refuge from persecution. In his reply, allegedly, Jesus commended the king for his faith, expressed regret that his mission in life precluded the visit, but promised that after his ascension into heaven, a disciple would visit Edessa and heal the king. And in fact, this is what happens. Disciple, Judas Thomas sent the apostle Edde to cure the king. And then a new era for the Assyrians in religion, science, and medicine came to the front. Next slide, please. Now, one may ask, why the Assyrians? Why were not the Persians who were chosen for this? Why were not the Egyptians? And in my search, I could find actually 4 plausible reasons. One of them is the geographical location of Assyria, and then the early diffusion of Christianity, the establishment of the great school of Edessa, and finally, the role played by the main church at that time. We would call it today the Catholic Church. We're going to address each one of those separately so that we get a little bit more information about it. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the geographical location of Assyria. If you look at the map on the slide, the yellow area is where Assyria expanded in the old time. And if you look at the map, on the north, there were the Greeks. Remember, the Greeks extended from Greece of today all the way through Turkey and Asia Minor. On the west, there were the Romans. On the south were the Egyptians. And on the east were the Persians. So the interaction between civilization and all aspects of life, which brings out the best of all to be shared by all. The free exchange of knowledge and skills between civilizations invites innovation and progress. Next slide, please. I think for some reason, do you guys hear me?
We can still hear you. Yeah.
Alexandria?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Did you
You're
hear me?
back. Yeah.
Sounds like I'm muted a little bit, but let me see here.
Okay,
Good. We're back again. So I'm going to advance the next slide. So let's talk about the second reason why I believe Assyrians were charged with this mission is the early spread of Christianity. As Assyrians accepted Christianity in 32, there was actually a lack of the scripture in their oral vernacular, which they so desperately needed. And because of that, they applied themselves diligently to study Greek. They became familiar with the Greek language. Actually, they were the first to translate the Old Testament from Greek to Syriac in what we know today as the Peshitta. Peshitta is literally means the simplified version of the Bible, which is considered one of the main references for the religious studies in Christianity. From it, meaning from learning or indulging in the Greek language, they came across a lot of Greek science, medicine, and literature. And that became an important turning point for the role they played in history. Next slide, please. This is not working well. Okay. So the third reason is the establishment of the great school of Edessa. There was a lot of interest of early Assyrian church fathers in the Greek version of the Bible, which encouraged them to be in contact with the Greek scholars. The interaction with the Greek scholars created an atmosphere of study and investigation in what later became the famous schools of Edessa and Sabes. Actually, Sabes was a school that was established before Edessa, but it was not very well known, and the main presbyter there was Ephraim, that many of us know about. This area that Assyrians lived in exchanged hand in terms of the political dominance. One time it was under the Persians, other one was under the Romans and the Greeks. So at the point where Sabine was given to the Persians, some of the Assyrian scholars in Sabine's school that were fighting the Persians off decided to run to the Roman side and seek asylum there, and they came to the city of Odessa. And many other scholars also immigrated with them. After a while, they decided to start a new school. So they called it the School of Edessa, which happened in 363 to 364 AD. The main goal of the school was to teach theology and Christian learning. However, even though that was a major, there was a growing interest in the study of medicine and science that gained a lot of attraction among the learners. Next slide, please. So after Ephraim came to Odessa and sought for the refugee status there, he resumed his teaching, which served as the start to the great school of Edessa. The school had no rival in the world during the 4th century after Christ. The professor must have taught a pure Hippocratic and Galenic medicine. Their religious enthusiasm as Christians now led them to exclude all the Babylonian and the pagan practices. And this school of medicine, at one point, they decided to build actually hospitals attached to the school where patients will get care and the learners will get instruction with the patients as part of the equation of the learning. And one of the stories documented is during the plague that just went across the region. In year 375, there was a hospital that was built with a capacity of 300 beds. That's a very large hospital, almost larger than many of the teaching hospitals that we know of today. In fact, I ended up publishing a paper about the role about the School of Edessa and the School of Jindi that came later on. We're going to be talking about it because these are the oldest medical schools that I could trace back after which the modern medical school are modeled. Because that was the first time where somebody thought about building a hospital within the premise, if you will, of the School of Medicine to have the concept of school and teaching hospital combined together. And that's what constitutes medical schools and universities at the present day. So kudos to those forefathers who were thinking ahead and who was able to transfer how we took care of patients and how we taught medicine to learners to where we are today. Next slide, please. So let's look at the achievements of the School of Edessa. These are some of the achievements. The Syriac translations of Theophania and the Martyrs of Palestine of Eusebius, Titus of Bostra, Discourse Against Manichaeans, which was a big issue at that time during the schism of the church, the Ecclesiastical History of Eusebius. This is an important book of history of the church, is available in the Vatican today. Actually, in it, you read about the story of Abgar Kama, the works of Theodore of Maswestia and Isagoge of Porphyry. This is the usual introduction to logic, which was originally written by Aristotle. Also, the Aristotle's Hermeneutica and the Aristotle's Analytica priors, with commentary that was added to it by Probus, which was the chief physician in Antioch, not Probus the emperor. Next slide, please. This is the final point. We talked about geographical location. We talked a little bit about the early spread of Christianity that required the Assyrians to learn the Greek language, and from there, the science and knowledge. The third thing, establishment of the great school of Edessa. And finally, the role played by the Catholic Church. As you know, during the Council of Ephesus in 431 AD, the Assyrian Church, at that time it wasn't called the Assyrian Church, it was called the Ancient Church of the East. And we had a new patriarch with the name of Nestorius, who had some teachings that are different than the mainstream church. And after this conference, they were excommunicated with their church and with their teachings. So the teaching of the Assyrian Church at that time were considered heretical in nature, which were not accepted by the mainstream church. So the Nestorian heresy became one of the greatest centrifugal forces caused by theological hatred. What was the outcome of that? It pushed Christianity. Instead of Emperor Zeno, who expelled the Assyrians and took everything they had, thinking that he can abolish them and basically stop their movement, actually it pushed Christianity across mountains and became an important link between the East and West. the Assyrian zealots became missionaries, and teaching were turned not only into theology, but also into more lucrative medical practices. They took the Silk Road to China, all the way to China, all the way through Persia to Iran. And until today, you'll find some old buildings, churches in China that have the Assyrian writings on it. There are actually interesting stories caused by such a move of our church all the way to the east. As you know, China had monopoly on silk for decades, not decades, actually for centuries. And the Europeans always thought that it was a special tree that produces silk, and that tree only grows in China, until our people went in their missionary work and they realized that it was a caterpillar. And they smuggled some of them back into their staff. And that's how the monopoly on silk was broken, through as an unintended consequence of the missionary work conducted by the Church of the East through the Silk Road to China. Next slide, please. Again, because of the wars and because we got actually excommunicated by by the emperor at that time, many of us sought asylum in Persia. The Sasanian king Kobad offered those zealots asylum, and they brought with them all the Syriac translations of the Greek medical works of Hippocrates, Galen, Aristotle. They were all taken to Persia. And they established the first Persian medical school in what was known at that time Jindi. Jindi were actually a city where, let's go to the next slide. It was populated mostly by captives from the Greeks and Romans during the continuous war between Persia and the other empires. So Shapur I attempted to Romanize the city and allowed for the expansion of this medical school that was established there. And the Hippocratic system of medicine was actually taught publicly for the first time in Persia. Many Greek physicians also joined. As you know, the Caesar's daughter was given in marriage to Shapur I. And as she moved to Iran or to Persia, a lot of the Greek physicians moved with her down, and they populated the city of Jindi. Shapur II transferred the school into a university that was mostly run by the Nestorian zealots or the Assyrians. Many teachers joined from Edessa as well. And the teaching, while it was Greek in a sense, the school itself took off with its own eclectical methods. And we'll talk a little bit more about that if we go to the next slide. Some of the changes that happened on that school of Jindi is during the reign of Nashirvan, where the school actually achieved the most prominence. Within its walls, Greeks, Jewish, Nestorians, Persian, Hindus taught, and the thoughts were freely extended. The main teaching was actually in Syriac, even though some of the classes were given in other languages. And by the order of the king himself, the university held a conference, which was something unheard of, talking about the diversity of scientific subject. There was a physician, again, the Syrian physician, the name of Jibra'il Dorsbad, who was a special physician to the king. He presided over the conference, aided by many physicians, Yohanna and Sophiste, and many others. And all the proceedings of that meeting were recorded. There is a record of them until today. Next slide, please. Jindi held the first place in the world for medicine and science for centuries. The unique and the pioneering group of the Nestorian physicians set an example for later generations to follow, not only in Persia, but in the entire Middle East. They adopted their methods of training physicians and caring for the sick. If I may, actually, they used to call hospital Bemaristan, which is a word that's even used today. That's actually, I'm not sure the origin of the word, but it basically means the place where you care for the patients. Ibn al-Qafqi, which is a very well-known Arab or Muslim biographer, wrote in the 20th century describing this school. And I read, quote, from his book, which I have a copy here at home in Arabic. He said, this is describing Jindi, they made rapid progress in science, developed new methods in treatment of disease along pharmacological lines. to the point that their therapy was judged superior to that of Greek and Hindus. Furthermore, these physicians adopted the scientific methods of other people and modified them by their own discoveries. They elaborated medical laws and they recorded the work they had been developing. This is a great testimony by one of the great biographers of that era. Next slide, please. So how did that school of medicine function? What was the structure and how did it function? They had an inpatient and outpatient facilities. Before that, it was completely apprenticeship model. The doctor would jump from place to place and have his one or two learners with him. Now we have classes, we have hospital, patients are admitted to the hospital, and some of them are followed as an outpatient basis, which is quite innovative at that time. There were separate wards for men and women. There were separate specialty services, for example, internal medicine, surgery, ophthalmology, etc. There were wards with barred windows for the mentally ill. And there was a pharmacy that functioned or was run by competent licensed pharmacists. And there was a large library and even some conferences or conference centers for meeting and for discussions. And again, this is all considered. Now it's very normal to have that stuff. At that time, in the 4th century, was fairly advanced. Next slide, please. The school continued, and it maintained a very strong hold during the after Islamic invasion in 636 AD. The Caliph Omar treated the school with utmost respect for 3 reasons. This is what I could find. 1, Arabs had no prior knowledge in science and medicine at that time. They were simply nomads and warriors. That's all they knew. And then many of the loyal graduates of the school cared for their prophet and the caliphs after him. And then a theological reason, number 3, which is the Nestorial denial of the motherhood of God and the Virgin of Mary, and their views regarding Trinity, which appealed so very much to the Islamic faith compared to other religious denominations. This was a time where the Abbasid Empire established its position in Baghdad, and they started slowly drawing on the resources of Jindi by the 13th century. And as a result of the area transfer of medical centers to the Abbasid capital of Baghdad, the glory of Jindi dwindled down. Next slide. So one may ask or may wonder, what is the fate of these 2 schools now? Next slide. I've had the pleasure of visiting one of them. This is the school of Edessa, as you see in the picture. It was the Church of Our Lady, Mother of God. It was named that way after it was taken away from the Nestorians. And then after the Islamic invasion, it was changed into a mosque, which is called today the Mosque of Ibrahim. It's still standing in the southeastern city of Urfa in Turkey. For those of you who are interested in visiting it, this is the school of Edessa originally that was established in 363. Next slide, please. The school of Jindi, nothing's left but some fragments and broken tile and pottery and some 10 mounds of near the present city of Shahabad in southwestern Iran. In fact, the government of Iran, I'm not sure how far back, they established a university into the same area and they named it as the University of Jindi, which is standing today. But the original building, you rarely see much to hold on to. I think I'm going to move next to the role played by our physicians during the Abbasid dynasty. Next slide, please. As you know, the school of Jindi was slowly taken or actually sucked up into Baghdad and led to dwindle down in the original city of Jindi. There are 2 groups of physicians that I want to talk about because they really played a major role in the history of medicine. First one is the Bakhtisha family, and the other physician is a single physician. His name is Hunayn ibn Ishaq, which was known in Europe as Jahanatius. They transferred medical knowledge through the services they provided over the course of almost 3 centuries. Next slide, please. So this is a genealogical map of the Bakhtisha family. You can see under number 1, Bakhtisha the first, we don't know much about him, and then Jerjis the first, and then Bakhtisha the second, and it continued that way. All these physicians are related to each other, father to son, to cousin, to father to son. They were the physicians of the Abbasid dynasty, the caliphs, for 250 years, year after year. Each and every one of them is a very established physician and very well published. There is no time to talk about all the contributions that they provided. Most of them are lost. Some of them are still alive, albeit in translations in Arabic, because most of the translations that occurred at that time happened when the Assyrians was translated from Greek to Syriac and then from Syriac to Arabic. Some of them were translated directly from Greek to Arabic. And there's a lot of nice stories about the ethics and morals of those stories. I can tell you that in Bakhtisha II, he was a very devout man, and when the Harun al-Rashid, during his expeditions against the Romans at that time, they used to bring a lot of women as concubines. And he gave 2 as a gift to Bakhtisha II, but he refused to accept them, citing that he's a Christian and they only take 1 woman in marriage. After that, Harun al-Rashid basically informed him he can go and attend any of his women and concubine without having a prior permission from the Caliph, which is, again, an exceptional privilege given to this gentleman. They continued to serve the royal dynasty until it fell on the hands of the Mongols in 1058 AD. Next slide, please. Talk about Hunayn ibn Ishaq. He was born to an Nestorian druggist in Al-Hira, which is close to the city of Najaf, which is the heartland of the Shiite in Iraq today. The gentleman only spoke Syriac and learned Arabic later in his life, in his 3rd decade of age. This is an important point that I'll elaborate a little bit more towards the end of the presentation. His knowledge of drugs, which I mean medicine, not recreational drugs, granted him a position as a dispenser to Ibn Masawayh, which is another famous doctor at the school of Jindi Shapur. However, he was fired soon for being too curious and too inquisitive. But he was determined to continue in medicine, and he applied himself to learn Greek and Arab. He went to Turkey, which was dominated by the Greek at that time, and he learned the language there. And then he went to Basra, southern part of Iraq, where he learned Arabic at the hands of one of the linguists down there. And he became so good at the languages, he started doing some work of translation of medical books, and he was recruited by the Bakhtisha family to the court of the Khalif al-Ma'mun. And after a while, he proved his position, and he was appointed by the Khalif actually to be in charge of Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom, which is the elite and the #1 scientific and knowledge institution in the city of Baghdad at the zenith of the Islamic and Arabic Empire. He was supervising all the translations from Greek and Syriac to Arabic. So let's look at some of his translations. If we go to the next slide. He translated 95 books of Galen from Greek into Syriac, 39 books of Galen from Greek into Arabic, 6 Syriac and 70 Arabic books translated by his pupils, which he did not think it was good enough. He had to revise all of them by himself. He had 50 Syriac versions translated by his predecessors, people who were before him. He had to redo them because he thought that they were not properly done. That included the Corpus Galena by Sergius Fras al-Ain, which is another famous Nestorian physician in modern-day Syria. And during his death in 877 AD, he was translating Galen's De Constitution Artis Medicae. He never finished it, actually. Next slide, please. If you look at his original works, he was the author of more than 100 original books. He claimed fame to Europe from his introduction to the arts Parva Galeni, which was translated into Latin. In Asia, he claimed fame by his questions on medicine and ophthalmology. Other writing included all the topics you see. He was such a prolific writer in almost every aspect of life, including medicine and non-medical issues. And in fact, he was very critical of his own translations to where he had to redo them after a while, after he became in better command of the languages. Next slide, please. It wouldn't be complete if we don't talk about his role of ophthalmology. Actually, Hunayn ibn Ishaq, or Johanna Theus, is considered the father of modern ophthalmology. He authored many books. He had the 10 treatises on the eye, which I have a copy of course, not the original one, the questions on the eye, the structure of the eye, the book of colors, the division of eye diseases, the choice of remedies for eye diseases, and the operative treatment of eye diseases. A lot of topics he actually covered in ophthalmology. Next slide, please. Let's talk a little bit about the ethics and morals of Ibn Ishaq. This is a nice story that I read in many books in 2 different languages. During the reign of Khalifa al-Mutawakkil, he bade him to prepare a poison for an enemy, promising him big rewards. He refused, and he was jailed for a year. After a year, he faced death. Actually, they got him out of jail, brought him in front of the Caliph and told him, you either make it or we're going to put you to sword. He refused again, citing his religion and his profession. He was imprisoned again and flogged from time to time. For him, his worst punishment was losing his books. I quote him from one of the books talking about his life. He said, I have lost all the books which I have gradually collected during the course of the whole of my life in all the lands in which I have traveled, all of which books I lost at one blow. He spent a long time going from country to country. Of course, the money, some of it was given by the Caliph and some of it by rich people who were interested in science, where he collected whatever he can get his hands on to be able to translate it into Syriac and or into Arabic. So that was for him his worst punishment. And you can see how devoted he was to his knowledge and his profession. Next slide, please. I often wonder why so little of this is known to the scholars and to the public alike. And I honestly could not find a better answer than simply marginalization. And I would like to talk about that, because every time I get into a discussion with colleagues, specifically from the Middle East, they claim that minorities are always too sensitive and that we think we're marginalized and there is no marginalization at all. It's just a matter of chance and odds of being chance. You know, many of my friends, colleagues who are not from the minorities decry the notion of marginalization. I had to take the extra steps to prove them wrong through actually science. So what did I do? Next slide, please. I actually ended up publishing this paper. You can read from the title, Marginalization of Ethnic and Religious Minorities in the Middle East History of Medicine, the Forgotten Contribution to Arabian and Islamic Medicine and Science. What I did, I conducted a computerized PubMed search for all the scholarly, peer-reviewed articles concerning medicine and science in the Middle East at the zenith of the Arabic and Islamic Empire, also known as medieval times for Europe. We use many keywords: Arabic, Arabian, Syriac, Assyrian, Jews, medicine, science, and medieval to capture citation in all languages. I found 630 citations, of which 350 were eliminated due to repetition and or irrelevance. The remaining 280 citations constitute this study that we ended up publishing. What was my null hypothesis? My null hypothesis, there was no marginalization. And now I have to accept or refute that theory. I have adopted the term Arabian as an acceptable representation to all ethnic minorities under the Arabic and Islamic rule. The data was analyzed using the binomial probability model, which is appropriate for this kind of statistical analysis. So what did my statistical analysis show? Now, if there was no marginalization, if this is the pure product of chance or randomness, there should be equal representation in the published literature. If not equal, at least close to each other. I will accept even 1 or 2 standard deviation. But what we have seen that the odds of chance being responsible for representing Arabs in 82 studies out of 107 citations are 1 in 233 millions. That is not randomness. The odds of chance being responsible for representing Islam in 48 out of 52 citations are 1 in 192 billions with a B. That's not a chance. The odds of chance being responsible for writing about Muslim scholars in 117 out of 142 are less than 1 in 2 quadrillions. The odds of chance being responsible for citing Avicenna in 75 out of 97 citations are less than 1 in 2 quadrillions. And then finally, the odds of a chance being responsible for citing the Assyrian historian scholars only 6 times out of 142 citations, less than 1 in 2 quadrillions. So what we learned from this is that there is a programmed marginalization for ethnic and religious minorities, not only historians and Assyrians, but also take the Jews, Maimonides and other people, take the Mandeans. And even on the Islamic level, many of the doctors that are labeled as Islamic doctors, they are Islamic doctors, but they're not necessarily Arabs. They could be Persians, they could be Turks. But everything has been added under this umbrella of Arabs. Now, why is it important? I'm not trying to put anybody down or tell people I'm better than you and you're not as good as I am. That's not the issue. One of the problems what minorities have been going through in the Middle East is the fact that we are considered a foreign element into the fabric of those countries. When the Assyrian Empire fell down in 612 BC, we had 20 million people. And because we lost our political power, we dwindled down to less than 7 million when the Islamic invasion took over in the 6th and 7th centuries. And what we are today? Less than 300,000 in that area. Part of the reason is that we've been depicted as that foreign element that was implanted by the Western countries to create political holdback into the region. That is not true. We're not foreign to the area. We're not foreign to the land. We've been always here. We're the indigenous people of the land. And that's why I'm bringing this to their attention, just to prove to people we're not new in this land. We existed from the day we had the empire, and we continue to contribute until today, albeit under a different umbrella. So with that, I will stop here, and I'll welcome any questions you may have. And I truly apologize for the technical problems that we ran with today.
Thank you, Dr. Johna, for your educational presentation and for sharing the Assyrians' contribution to science and medicine. We will now move towards the Q&A portion of this webinar. So as a reminder, if you have any questions, please make sure to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your page. We will try our best to answer your questions since we do have a lot. And we are a little bit over, but if you want to stick with us, please do, because this Q&A session will be great. So let me go ahead and look to see what to read. Give me one moment. So one person has a question about the health sciences achievements that Assyrians have. Did they originate from the late BC? They originated from late BC to early AD. They came from 6,000 to 4,000 BC as written in ancient Mesopotamian medical books. I think this person wants you to kind of elaborate a little bit more on that.
Yes, It is true. There was a lot of medical achievements even from the days, and there's actually a very nice book called Assyrian Babylonian Medicine that is published by, I would want to say, Joanne Skerlock. It's a big book, which is a direct translation of all the tablets that contain medical information. A lot of stuff is known in the past. I can tell you that they were even far more advanced than the Greeks in the sense they never believed. I mean, the vision, just take an example of vision. Most, even Greeks, after the Assyrians thought that the light starts from the eye and it goes forward, that's what you can see, where Assyrians didn't believe in that. And illnesses, they believe, they never believed the illnesses came from inside you and they turn into a disease. They believed that there are some foreign elements that came from the outside and led to the disease. Of course, they didn't call them microbes and bacteria and stuff like that. They called them demons or evil or something like that. They conducted the first cesarean, they conducted the first craniotomy. I mean, there is some description of that. I did not elaborate on that for the sake of time, and I made it very clearly at the beginning. I'm going to focus on the time after we lost our empire, because people thought we vanished. We did not vanish. We continued and we added more to the knowledge and science, and that is how we prove our existence from the time we lost our geopolitical state until today.
Okay, someone else wanted you to kind of elaborate more on the school of Jindi Shapir, that there's fragments left behind, but are there any research being conducted in terms of maybe restoring it or anything of that nature?
I am not very sure. I know that the last time it was visited by a Western scholar was Dr. Alan Oldfather Whipple, who wrote a book about it. I have a copy. I used book hunters to get me that copy. It's only one edition. It's called The Role of Nestorians and Muslims in the History of Medicine. He visited the site himself, and it was just mounds of mud. Nobody actually excavated or tried to restore it, as far as I know. And the picture I put is a recent one. There is what looks like an old building, but it's only a small piece of it. So I'm not sure if there was enough effort, or it is a priority for people running the show now in Iran.
And can you talk more about Assyrians' contributions in the last 100 years, especially in the field of medicine?
That is a different topic and needs a long time. Actually, it started after the Presbyterian missionaries went into Iran in the 1800s. And they established school and established medical schools there. And there was a lot of graduates there. They started the hospitals and caring for the patients. It doesn't have to be Assyrians, Kurds, Persians, anybody. But that requires a different session, different presentation.
Okay, let me see. I think there's one more question that we have, just so that we don't go overboard. Was the first open heart surgery an Assyrian or something similar?
I'm not aware of that.
Okay.
The first open heart surgery was done in South Africa. Maybe there is another thing in history, but there's a lot I don't know. I don't claim, I'm not a historian. I don't claim that I know everything, but I have not heard of that.
Okay, wonderful. If anybody else has any more questions, please go ahead and type it in now, just because we do want to wrap things up. Let me see. So one more. Do we still have any Syriac books in medicine or in pharmacology that dates back to the era of translating during the Abbasi period? I know one Syriac book called Sparsamane. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. Do we know the date of the book?
Sparsamane. We don't know. I have actually a copy in my possession, the Syriac textbook of medicine. It's in 2 languages, in English and in Old Syriac, the classical Syriac, Lishan Atiq. I have that. It was published in 1896. There was a British scholar who was in the region of Nineveh, and he found a book written on the skin of a deer. It's one of the deacons in that area. So he borrowed it, took it to London, translated it, and published it. It's missing a couple of chapters. Scholars believe it belongs to the 12th century. And I have a copy of it here at home in both languages.
Okay, and then are there any books by Assyrians about the plants they use for medicine?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the last part.
Are there any books by Assyrians about the plants they used for medicine?
Only Sparsamana. Sparsamana, but we don't know the writer. We don't know the date. I read that book in old Assyrian language. Some of them is actually nonsense, to be honest with you. But there's a lot of description of, because as I mentioned in my presentation, they relied heavily on herbs, herbal treatment. And it must have been known for a long time. But we simply don't have any documentation. I myself started writing chapters in Assyrian. I've written 6 chapters. They're not published yet, about diseases of the heart, diabetes, endocrinology, diseases of the skin, diseases of the breast. The challenge is trying to get up to date with the terminology. What is the PET scan? What is the CT scan? And so on. Believe it or not, the Assyrian language or the Syriac language is so capable. I was able to find all of those, albeit it's my own derivatives, but it is based on roots of language that are available in that language.
Wonderful. Is there any way that you can share some of the resources with the audience, maybe in an email? Because a couple people are interested a little bit more about the things you were mentioning. So,
of course, I mean, just because I was in a hurry, I didn't mention all the resources. Of course, there's a lot of references. I can share them with you. And in speaking about the books, one of the books that was translated, actually, this is an important piece of information. Hunayn ibn Ishaq of Jahanati has translated the book. It's called As-Sina'a al-Saghira, means the small profession. That's what it means. That book is still preserved in the Garrett Collection in Princeton University on the East Coast in New York. And also there were 7 books of Gallen's anatomy that are completely lost in their original Greek form. They are so preserved in their Arabic translations that was performed by Hunayn ibn Ishaq. So he's done so much to where a lot of this original work would have been totally lost was it not for him.
Wow. Well, we are 5 minutes over. I know we started late, but we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. We now reached the end of this webinar, and I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone who joined us today, including the students from Dr. Sargon's Donabed's class at Roger Williams University. In addition, I want to especially thank our speaker, Dr. Johna. Your contribution to the Assyrian community is vital and important. And on behalf of the Assyrian Studies Association, we are honored you were able to join us for this webinar, and we invite you for future webinars as well. For all of our attendees, we encourage you to subscribe to our email by visiting our website, and to follow us on all social media platforms at Assyrian Studies. Just so you can stay up to date on upcoming projects, events, grants that are coming up with deadlines. So if you are interested, please go ahead and do that. And as a friendly reminder, we have our summer art workshop that begins tomorrow with Assyrian artist Nora Bedin. So please make sure to visit our website for more information on that. Dr. Johna, I want to make sure you have a couple minutes to spare to give your concluding remarks if you would like to do so.
Thank you. I thank each and every one of you for your interest and for your willingness to listen to this. And again, my thought is not to divide communities within our fabric, but rather bring them together by knowing more about each other. The more we learn about each other, the more tolerant we become with each other. And I apologize for the technical difficulties. There are so many, you have no idea what I had to go through. I was planning to give this talk from work, and then suddenly I found that our IT had blocked the access to this website. So I honestly drove like James Bond to get to home on time. And I got on time, and I couldn't get the Zoom to work, and we twisted this around. And the whole reason why I wanted to do it from work, because my AC went out a couple of days ago. Right now I'm sweating, not because I'm nervous, simply because it's so hot in here. It's a sauna. So I thank you very much. And it's been such an honor and a pleasure. And have a wonderful evening for all of you.
Of course. Thank you again. And thank you, everybody. Hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.